It is an honor to be joined by Dr. Mamtimin Allah. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He
Yes,
is
thank you.
a,
Yes, right.
I see. He is a Uyghur activist and a representative to the European Union of the East Turkestan government in exile. He is the author of the book Worse Than Death, Reflections on the Uyghur Genocide, and he's also the author of an essay I found in the journal Liberties called The Death Trap of Difference, or What the Uyghurs Understand. Dr. Allah, thank you very much for joining this show.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and I do hope that I pronounced your name correctly.
Yeah, very correct. Yeah.
That's a relief.
So just quick question. This is not the live
No, this
presentation.
is a recording.
Okay. Yeah, recording that you could edit later, right?
Yes.
Okay. No, because I have freedom to make mistakes, so that's why.
Yeah. So am I. Let's begin by. I'd like to begin by quoting from the essay that you wrote, which I mentioned. The Uyghur Genocide, and here's the quote begins, which aims to put an end to the Uyghur question once and for all, includes the incarceration of millions of Uyghurs in the camps, systematic campaigns of brainwashing and humiliation through torture, the forced sterilization and rape of Uyghur women, both inside and outside the camps, industrialized organ harvesting, the orphanization, this is in quotes, of hundreds of thousands of Uyghur children forcibly separated from their parents and assimilated into Chinese culture, the systematic prevention and reduction of Uyghur population growth, as well as others means for the eradication of Uyghur identity. And obviously you didn't pull any punches. That was a very vivid description of what is going on there. But so my question to you is, can you provide historical context of the names that most people hear in the news lately? For example, Uyghur, Xinjiang, and East Turkestan.
Yes. Okay, so historical background to this the Uyghur question is very long, and I would like to give you a very brief description of the Uyghur history. So Uyghurs have historically been a local people of the land, which was originally called East Turkestan. Even before that, it had many meanings, but ultimately it was crystallized into this name. It's more like at that time it was more like a geographical name for the land, which includes current East Turkestan, or what the Chinese government calls a Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, and some surrounding areas. And this area lies at the heart of Central Asia as a crossroad between east and the west, and the north and the south. In particular, this is the location is extremely or has extremely been important for the Silk Road, connecting east and west, and also the connecting different civilizations and cultures. And due to its geographic location, the Uyghurs have enormously been benefited from this incessant cultural and civilizational exchanges between East and West, and starting from either from Rome Empire to China, or from China to Rome Empire. So across which we have a huge span of land, and the two big continents. One is Europe, the other one is Asia. So the political history of Uyghurs was also quite long and quite rich and quite complex. Instead of diving deep into this historical depth to the Uyghurs, I would like to confine myself to saying a few words about the political history of Uyghurs. So this land, due to its geographical advantage, has been a very attractive location for many empires and kingdoms and political forces throughout history. including like, for example, China's empires and Turkish empires, Uyghur Empire, and also some other empires like even Russians were also quite interested to take it over, and also including a great British Empire as well. So that's why we'll call it the Great Game happened at the heart of Central Asia. Between the Central Asia became a proxy land for great powers to influence each other, compete with each other's influence, etc. For example, including Russia, China, and also great British Empire. So the Uyghur history and political history was shaped by uh, constant shifts in this power game played out by big powers at that time. And so during since the 18th century, the Qing dynasty in China had some kind of some kind of influence over the land, but it met with very severe resistance of the local Uyghurs against this Qing dynasty's influence. And interesting, at that time in the 17th century or 18th century, Qing dynasty committed a genocide against Mongols in the northern part of East Turkestan, because the Qing dynasty perceived that the Mongols posed a great threat to its power and also its long-term enmity. So then Qing dynasty carried out this genocide, and Uyghurs quickly filled in that land quickly. And so then we had a like expanded or also like more consolidated sense of the East Turkestan, including a current territory and beyond. But then the relationship between Uyghurs and Qing dynasty was always in conflict, sometimes a little bit like cooperation, but mostly in conflict. And it was ultimately in the second half of the 19th century, Uyghurs created its own independent state called Kashgaria, including almost like 7 cities at that time, under the leadership of Yakbek, what's called Yakbek. But then afterwards, due to the financial support given to Qing dynasty by the British Empire, and also even at that time Tsarist Russia, the Qing dynasty was able to retake or take this land over from us. The Uyghur, the Kashgaria state was defeated. And then in 1884, Qing dynasty turned East Turkestan into one of its provinces called Xinjiang, meaning new territory. This is a colonial name for the East Turkestan that Qing dynasty was for the first time, Qing dynasty established its administrative force, administrative structure in East Turkestan, until the Uyghurs again staged the next revolt in 1933 and as well as 1944 to create their own independent state called East Turkestan Republic. But later on, this East Turkestan Republic was which was second East Turkestan Republic, was originally supported by the former Soviet Union, but later on, due to the secret agreement between Mao Zedong and Stalin, the second republic was a given by the former Soviet Union to China. So the Mao Zedong agreed to take it over from the former Soviet Union, and the independent Uyghur state was crushed, annexed by the Chinese People's Liberation Army in 1949. So since then, the East Turkestan has been a colonial part of China, and even the name East Turkestan has never been allowed by the Chinese government to be in use because of its colonial connotation. So, and then since 1949, so the Uyghurs have been subject to a series of assimilations and oppression the policies culminating in the current genocide. So this is the history, in particular, the political history of the East Turkestan and Uyghurs
Of course,
in a very succinct way. Yeah.
in the essay, you've made a great deal of effort and brilliantly so of summarizing basically the difference between the Uyghurs and the Chinese culture, um,
Yeah.
which is which is something that everyone should know because, of course, Uyghurs are not Chinese. But as an aside,
Yeah.
um, uh, the Western media calls it the Uyghurs, but how are the Uyghurs themselves comfortable with that label? Like the name Uyghurs, do they call themselves that?
No, the Uyghurs are quite comfortable with the name Uyghurs, but Uyghurs are not all Uyghurs are comfortable with the name, such names as, for example, Chinese Muslims,
I see.
uh, even Uyghur Muslims. Uh, and so why? Because the Uyghurs' argument is that since the West doesn't call Tibetan Buddhists, and so why Uyghurs are called Uyghur Muslims, why this Muslim identity or Islamic identity must be attached to Uyghurs. And Uyghurs, the name Uyghur is sufficient enough to identify Uyghurs from their own self-perception as well as by anybody in the world. So that's why Uyghurs are sufficient for Uyghurs to be identified with. Yeah.
It's good to be careful because, of course, I'm from Vietnam, and the Uyghurs are pretty much a foreign people to me, and
Yeah,
basically
yeah,
how I've come to contact with them
yeah.
and their culture is via you, and of course, reading
Yeah, and also,
English
yeah,
language
because the
media.
Vietnam is quite interesting. It is not to answer your question, but it's a different thing. But Vietnam
Yeah.
was there was a war between China and Vietnam in 1979,
Yes.
and Vietnam was portrayed to at that time we were quite young, and Vietnam was portrayed to us as an enemy state.
Mhm.
And due to that kind of like a conflict or the very short-lived war between China and Vietnam, but at that time we didn't know the background information, background to that conflict. And but at the same time, Vietnam is a kind of like ideological, like there's some kind of ideological affinity between China and Vietnam. For example, that was also conflict, like a confusing point, not only for Uyghurs but also other Han Chinese as well. It's quite like complex relationship. But recently, after we have had some joint demonstrations in Australia with Vietnamese communities, we have a big Vietnamese community in Sydney and elsewhere in Australia. Then we have come to an understanding of the Vietnamese conflict with China, overtly or cowardly. In particular, Chinese like belligerent and aggressive expansionist policy and practice as well as behavior around the Vietnam and also in other parts of the Pacific area. Then the Vietnamese and the other countries are extremely wary of as well as quite a cautious of Chinese expansionism in the area and beyond. So from that angle, we have come to a kind of like understanding of the Vietnam's relationship with China and vice versa.
Yes, I'm very touched to hear that. I'm not a Vietnamese historian per se, but the way I can describe it is that, of course, Vietnam and China has always been in conflict, the Vietnamese and the Chinese, even though
Yes.
Vietnam is adapting the same kind of reforms that Deng Xiaoping has
Yeah.
adopted in China, namely a state-sponsored socialism with um,
Yeah.
capitalism, free market characteristics. But the
Yeah.
Vietnamese and the Chinese have always been in conflict for thousands of years. And the 1979 war, and this is to my knowledge, so I cannot really be used as an authority on this one, is because Vietnam decided to intervene in the Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia, where uh, several battalions of Vietnamese soldiers were sent in to depose Pol Pot. And Pol Pot at that
Yeah.
time was an ally to China. So it Okay.
Genocider as well. Yes. Yeah.
So another
Yeah.
genocide that happened.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so back to your essay, two sentences really caught my attention. You
Yeah.
said, to an exaggerated degree, Chinese culture is time-oriented, and Uyghur culture, to an exaggerated degree, is space-oriented. So
Yeah.
please explain what that means.
Uh, this is like, of course, it's exaggeration in the first place. Hence, exaggeration is a swollen part of reality. That's why it's called exaggeration. But let me get back to the point that China is time oriented in the sense that Chinese culture is quite unique in the sense that there is in Chinese culture, the the past, sagacious, sacred past. There's a shared past and shared sacredness of the past as well. And China also has a word like Huaxia, which denotes the all Chinese people under the sun, all Chinese people one under the sun,
Mhm.
and with the shared past. The sense of shared past is quite crucial for Chinese identity. And so this shared past is uh, unchanging and also defining any kind of future progress in the sense that the future is just extension of the past, and all greatness as achieved in the past would be realized in the future repeatedly. And it's reminds me of like Hegelian works, like a Geist, like in the sense that the spirit it manifests itself in time repeatedly, something like that. So there is essentialism in the sense that there's a Chineseness which was already established in the past, and this Chineseness will never change. But it's just like it, which may have variety of manifestations over time, but it's still the same essence of being Chinese throughout the history. And so, of course, to be time oriented doesn't mean that it's not space oriented, because as a people, they occupy space over time. But for Chinese, is time is more important than space. But now the space is also is quite important, because the space, or the expanded space, is the defines Chinese politics in such, it defines the Chinese expansionism, that China now is claiming its ancient, like Vietnam is one of its like ancient territory from Chinese political mythology. Taiwan is one of the parts of the Chinese territory, and East Turkestan is the same. Tibet is the same. So there is also sacred space as well over time, and it doesn't change.
Yes.
And hence it's like, but ultimately it's like the time validates space, not the other way around. And that's why I put the emphasis on time,
Mhm.
or consciousness of time in Chinese perception, without neglecting the importance of space as well. Now space is getting more like prominent, playing a more prominent role in Chinese politics as well. So I am aware of that. And for the Uyghurs, on the other hand, Uyghurs doesn't have a sacred past. Uyghurs doesn't have any kind of like uh, unique future. But as a Muslims, Uyghurs have Islamic sense of time. Like just like Buddhistic sense of time is something eternally circular, but in Islamic time, notion of time is more like linear. So there was a creation, there is life, and there is a salvation, just like other Abrahamic religions like Christianity and Judaism. So Uyghurs' time is in this way. It's nothing like it's not like something different to other people. But what important for Uyghurs is space, in the sense that like Uyghurs have a special like location or locality which defines its cultural identity. Thanks to the Silk Road, and thanks to the being located in the crossroads of the all great civilizations like like ancient Aryan civilization to the Uyghurs and others. So that's why space is quite important. But having said that, I am again not forgetting the importance of time for Uyghurs as well. I'm just like in exaggerated sense is I am putting emphasis on different things for to highlight the fundamental difference between the cultural formation and cultural awareness as well as cultural perceptions of two different peoples, and that's my like narrative strategy
Mhm.
in the article.
Yes, you've said it yourself that because of this intersection that is Turkestan lies between the East and the West, it has imported in its culture and its values elements of both the East and the West. And this is a important sentence, quote, Uyghurs are perhaps the only people on earth who have worshipped all the major world religions throughout history, including totemism, shamanism, Zoroastrianism, Manichaeanism, Buddhism, the Nestorian Church, and Islam. So obviously, the label of Uyghur Muslims is
Yeah,
a very misleading one.
yeah,
And of course, the way I understand it, at least from a very basic understanding of Chinese culture and history, like you said, the future is merely a continuation of what's
of the
past.
past. Yes.
And
Yeah,
and the way I see it, the Chinese, they practice a form of cultural supremacy, or if not racial, in that they believe that there's such a thing as Chinese culture is very much monolithic and consistent through time. And so
yep,
it allows little to no import from the outside
yep,
world.
yep.
So with that said, I would like to uh, pay attention to a quotation from a poet that you featured at the beginning of this essay. I hope I'm
Yeah,
pronouncing his name right. Perhat Tursun. Tursun.
Parha Tursun. Yes, yes. Parha Tursun. Yes,
Okay. So the
Tursun.
quotation,
Yeah, yeah,
the,
yeah,
the poem, the quotation says, "In that tower built of skulls, you will find my skull as well. They cut my head off just to test the sharpness of a sword. When before the sword, our beloved cause and effect relationship is ruined like a wild lover. Do you know that I am with you?" So
yeah,
the one thing I know of Purat Tursun is he is currently being interned or being
yeah, yeah,
detained at a concentration camp.
yeah,
So
yeah.
what is the significance of Purat Tursun as a poet in Uyghur culture?
Uh, Parha Tursun is one of the most famous modernist and somehow postmodernist Uyghur writers. And secondly, Tursun's literary taste is extremely unique, that he had a very deep uh, understanding of the Western literature, including Kafka, including Camus, and including others. So recently, one of his uh, novels has been translated into English, which is called the Backstreet. And also, if you read the some comments on this book, which are really, really phenomenally like praiseworthy, then you can understand Pat's contribution to the Uyghur literature. And the number three is we as human beings, we cherish originality in our intellectual work, including literature. So he is also an original thinker, original writer. So this originality is quite little bit like quite anachronistic and a bit misplaced in Uyghur culture, because as I said in my article, that Uyghur culture is syncretic culture consisting of the influence of variety of civilizations. But Paratursun is unique, that he doesn't show any influence, but he tried to show that he is unique. He is not influenced by any other. But while he is being influenced by many great writers, he tries to show that he is original thinker. So it's like quite like dynamics in his thinking. That on the one hand he is quite original. On the other hand, this originality comes from this unique Uyghur phenomenon, which is syncretism. So it's quite interesting dynamics. And the number 4 is Parrot's imagination is quite wild, even sometimes quite cruel in its astonishing clarity and astonishing depth and width. And if you read his book, it's like he has a very, he can fly in the very great skies, but as well as he is able to go into the underworld where you can see some dark forces, which could be likened to the unconscious or human unconsciousness. So that's why his imagination captures something great and something good and something evil, something great and something really horrifying. And this is quite unique. This is quite rare in human talent. So that's why Paraturson is has a very unique position in Uyghur literature.
So from what you've described of his brilliance, I mean, it has become a horrific tragedy and crime that he's currently being detained
Yeah.
in a concentration camp.
And yeah, in that poem that I use it in the article, sorry that I have to say something about that. It is like a pre-seeing. It was a pre-seeing of a genocide. Actually, it was, of course, it's not a actual or precise description of the current genocide, but there was a pre-taste, there was a pre-seeing, was a prediction, which was astonishing in the sense that, but at the same time, I know that because I knew his vision, I knew that this Uyghur genocide is nothing new. This genocide uh, had variety of antecedent small scale massacres and genocide, historically speaking. And that poem captured the continuum of the Uyghur suffering and Uyghur losses. So it can have, this poem can point to any genocide in our history with a equal horror and with the equal like meaning. I would say that one. So that's why this poem has a universal meaning for Uyghurs. And if you don't understand, for example, if one doesn't understand Uyghur culture, one doesn't understand the meaning or reference points within or in this poem. So that's why it's quite like dense and quite like illuminating, as well as quite indicative sense of a poem that captures the essential tragedy of Uyghur history or Uyghur people in general.
Yes, it's both illuminating and horrifying, the excerpt that you've featured, which
Yeah.
I would presume is a translation. So with that, I would like to ask, what is the language that the Uyghurs communicate in?
Uyghurs still communicate, Uyghurs use Uyghur language, which is part of the Altaic language, like part of the Altaic language family. Uh, and Uyghurs have some linguistic affinity with other language, in particular with Uzbek language, Kazakh language, Turkish language, and interestingly with Japanese and Koreans, because the grammatical structure of the Uyghur language is similar to that of Korean and Japanese. And that's why all these languages are put under the umbrella of Altaic languages, which are controversial for some linguists. But since I am not a linguist, I don't want to go into that one. But usually Uyghurs speak Turkic Uyghur or Turkish versions of a language called Uyghur language.
I see. So, how would you describe the average Chinese perception of the Uyghurs, and vice versa, the average Uyghur perception of the Chinese population?
The average perception, yes, it needs a kind of big survey, and unfortunately, we have neither you nor I have this capacity to do the survey. But from my experience and my observation as well, I would say that average China's perception of Uyghurs is quite negative, or getting more negative over time. Previously, as I indicated in the article, that previously we didn't know each other quite well because we didn't live together, and even we live it together somehow, but our relationship was just like ordinary encounters. But when we were invaded, then there was a paradigm change, that it's like invaders and the invaded. So then this relationship had kind of power structure, colonial connotations, as well as like unfair treatments of Uyghurs by a Han Chinese. So we see Chinese from below because we were invaded by Chinese, and that in that sense, and Chinese see us from above as invaders. And as you quite briefly mentioned, that Chinese people usually have a kind of xenophobic, even racist attitude towards other people, because as I indicated in the article, that there is a Middle Kingdom notion as a central perception, which still operated in Chinese mentality, that China, though isolated, though different, lies at the center of human civilization, and everybody else outside of civilization as barbarians.
Mhm,
And it's not this view is nothing new, because Romans say the same thing, Greeks say the same thing about some people, the others, the aliens. And so we were the racial other to Chinese, that we were to some extent, from racial point of view, we are not fully yellow race like Chinese, but at the same time we have some features of having the same, like being belonging to the same race with Chinese. So that's also a little bit like a confusion to us as well as to them. But it's more about, not about the racial thing like black and white people in American context or others, but in this context, it's more about the ethnic difference. Like we speak this different language, we worship the different god, and we have completely different culture, etc. So that difference gives Chinese people a kind of uneasiness, because Chinese people ordinarily think that they are the best. Their culture must be emulated, their culture must be accepted by Uyghurs. But Uyghurs have persistently resisted against this Chinese culture, that has caused lots of confusion among Chinese, that why these people who are weak have been rejecting of our culture, etc. So in that sense, Chinese are irritated, even indignified by the continual refusal of Uyghurs to be Chinese, and that has created hatred.
mhm,
Apart from that, apart from that, Chinese culture, even Chinese people, like Chinese race, let me say that, is a result of great amalgamation of lots of small like ethnic peoples or others. It's great amalgamation. Hence, they even, like for example, a northern Chinese people can't understand the language of the South Cantonese, for example.
mhm,
The people use Putonghua don't understand the people use Cantonese, though they live under the same umbrella, but they have lots of differences. But still, they call themselves as Chinese. In that sense, this kind of historical experience has given Chinese people a kind of advantage, or kind of like an entitlement, that everybody must be part of us. But then they have met with only two people have persistently resist against this. One is the Uyghurs, the other one is Tibetans. And hence this resistance has created a anxiety, frustration, uh, confusion, and also even hatred of Chinese against Uyghurs. That's, I guess, it's ordinary. And also after the 9/11 tragedy in the US, due to the global Islamophobia, and Chinese people have, due to the government propaganda, have advanced to have felt like no have felt the import, like they have normalized the Uyghur phobia because they are Muslims, they are bad people, they are threat, they are terrorists, and hence the Uyghurs are terrorists and also enemy from within are the interchangeable concept for Chinese people ordinary, and that has fueled the deepened sense of hatred of ordinary Han Chinese against Uyghurs. And for Uyghur perception of Han Chinese is that it's more like a moral, that in the sense that Uyghurs are not like they are also see Chinese as invaders, though not all Uyghurs, but most Uyghurs see them as invaders. But most Uyghurs see Chinese as morally inferior people because of their moral behavior, moral conception, etc. Because if you look at China's history, from Uyghur mentality, the China history is full of lies, deception, and violence.
Mhm.
Despite the fact that Chinese people portray themselves as peace-loving people, but when we learned their history, we were shocked to discover that how horrific their history was or is, and hence Uyghurs had a kind of like a mistrust of Han Chinese, and also feel that they are morally like depraved or morally despicable people. And hence, for example, not all colonized people have a moral hatred against the colonizers, for example, in history. Some of them, yes, have, but some of them, but for Uyghurs, Han Chinese in general haven't created any kind of sense of like awe, moral respect, or moral acceptance that yes, they are great people. No, and hence Uyghurs have developed a kind of certain sense of moral distance from Chinese. And on top of that, Islam has been a spiritual shield of Uyghurs against Chinese. For example, Uyghurs, like previously, Uyghurs usually didn't go to a Chinese family for anything to eat, for example, either dinner or lunch, whatever, because Uyghurs feel that since Chinese people use a pork, so pork is not halal or allowed for Uyghurs. So there is no like a shared meal between Uyghurs and Han Chinese. And that's a great barrier. And on top of that, interracial or interethnic marriage between two peoples was never encouraged. Though Chinese tried to get married to Uyghur girls, usually, mostly, but Uyghurs persistently resisted against this. And it's extremely unique phenomenon that despite the colonial history, there was few interethnic marriages between the two peoples. There are this this world was segregated world. Uyghurs live it in their world and Chinese live it in their world. But in political world, this world is amalgamated, put under the rule of Chinese. But in cultural world, in cultural sense, this world is divided. There's no deep communication between the two peoples. Only like dialogue or communication happens in the in political space, but not in cultural space. No, let alone in a religious space. So hence, and ultimately, this segregation or this separation, cultural separation and linguistic separation, frustrated Chinese rulers because that separation allowed Uyghurs to maintain their culture as much as possible in the process of assimilations policies. But then ultimately, after the 9/11, Chinese government was emboldened to use more like harsher and harsher assimilations and even oppression, suppressional policies against Uyghurs until they carried out a full-fledged genocide. Uh, so in 2016 or 2017.
I see. Um, So as you were expressing this difference between the Uyghurs and the Chinese, I keep thinking about how the experience that the Vietnamese have with the Chinese throughout history, how the similarities and
Mhm.
differences are with the Uyghur population, because despite the fact that Vietnamese and Chinese cultures and peoples, they have a lot of animosity with each other. I see in Vietnamese culture and literature a lot of elements from the Chinese culture and literature. Um, Many of the words that Vietnamese use are borrowed from the Han Chinese language. Um, and of course, we adopted the same political
Yes.
system that as the
Even
Chinese.
your name is also remind me a little bit about Chinese as Chong. Chong, I don't know how to pronounce it. Chong, right? Chong or Cheong?
It's
How do you
Chuang, but
Cheong? Yeah. It's
yeah,
also like in Chinese language, they have also this, but might be a coincidence. I don't know. But go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you. Sorry.
yeah, there are people who are, have similar names as myself who are Chinese, and of course, there's the slight irritation of the average Westerner mistaking me for a Chinese, considering how different culturally and even ethnically we are. And of course, as I've observed, the Uyghurs, their religion, Islam, is a very significant bulwark against being assimilated into Chinese culture presently and in the past, as well as other forms of religions that I've listed. Um, so even though Vietnam has a national border sovereignty, it has successfully preserved national sovereignty against the Chinese. So far, much of Vietnamese culture and literature has been all too influenced by the Chinese. And I must say, from my experience talking to the Vietnamese that I've known and love, we are not all too proud of that. We would prefer to learn from the West, Western culture and Western civilization. But
Hmm. Hmm.
tragically enough, the Uyghurs, even though they've successfully managed to preserve a sense of cultural identity and even national identity of their own, well, and so far that culture and national identity has been trampled on by the same Chinese forces that have haunted
Yeah,
us.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. But it's
Well,
quite interesting to observe these two cultures, like to the Vietnamese culture and Uyghur culture, and their relationship to a dominant, like or like a kind of like a strong a culture. We both of these two kinds of relationship, Uyghur and Chinese, and Vietnamese and Chinese. In this, it's quite interesting to compare these two relationships. Interestingly, that for example, for us, what's our advantage is, and also each relationship has its advantage and disadvantage, pros and cons. For us, advantage is that we are linguistically, culturally, religiously, historically are completely different to Chinese. Only thing that can bind us together to somehow historically is that our common Buddhism heritage, because Uyghurs, small part of Uyghurs worship Buddhism for over 1,000 years.
yeah.
That is the kind of, and even Chinese, even Uyghur Buddhist monks translated the books from India, from Sanskrit into Uyghur, and even some of them translated into Chinese. So Uyghurs played a crucial role in this religious transmission of Buddhism from India through us to China. That's the thing, only commonality between us. But apart from that, we have had no commonality with Chinese. So we have a natural boundary line with Chinese. So nothing can even, and this has, and this was later on, this was like supported and strengthened by our religious faith, Islam, gradually. But then irony is that this is also like Islam is both like pros and cons of this the separation or boundary between us and the Chinese is that, but then China used our religious faith against us, like turned it against us
Yeah.
after the 9/11. And so our religion has to some extent be used by China as a kind of fatal weapon against us. And that is the kind of thing that on the one hand, Islam has helped us to be who we are. On the other hand, it's precisely the same Islam has helped China to kill us, to find excuse that all Uyghurs are terrorists, and Islam is a mental illness, and hence we have to cure this mental illness through the institutionalized environment, which is called, as you know, that is re-education centers. But for you, for example, it's also you have also, from my understanding, perhaps I am not this expert, but it's just my very remote observation is that you have also quite close and dangerously close cultural affinity with Chinese, because as you said, and we also observed that it's like many things are in common. Mainly, this commonality or commonness has historically been strengthened by the religious affinity between Buddhism, that between Chinese and Vietnamese. And second one is political ideology, more or less is the same. But then this closeness, on the one hand, it's dangerous in the sense that if this boundary is not kept, then there is a kind of the risks of like being amalgamated to Chinese. But at the same time, this like closeness gives you a sharp like caution,
Yes.
awakens you uniqueness against something dangerously similar. So then you will put more emphasis on your difference instead of similarity with China and the Chinese culture, quite like consciously, quite deliberately, and strategically. But for us is we don't have like, we can't control the narratives around Islam because it's global issue beyond our control. Ultimately, we have been victim of this Islamophobia, as well as all the like wrong and even evil schemes of the other radical Islamists, and we have become a victim. And when we are in a victimhood, no Muslim country or no Muslims have ever come to our assistance. But in your case, you know your strengths, you know your weaknesses, and you know how to survive in this world in a dangerously close to China. So I guess this is, I guess, my comparison of two cultures vis-a-vis Chinese culture.
Yes, I think you're exactly right from my point of view. And there lies the death trap of difference, as the title of your essay indicates. And
Yeah.
I would really note that commonality itself can be a death trap because, well, the Chinese throughout history may find more and more excuses to assimilate the Vietnamese, as they are doing right
Yes.
now with our
Yeah.
islands as part of their Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah.
And personally, I've always found
And
it.
only
Yeah,
yeah. Sorry.
but
Go ahead. Go ahead.
that's
Sorry.
fine. I find it a tragedy that the Vietnam War had to happen, obviously, to the Vietnamese as well as to the U.S. But from the Vietnamese perspective, it didn't have to happen because even though Vietnam was really communist at the time, it can be used as a bulwark against China as well as Soviet influence because of our historical animosity with China. So there's that. Yeah,
Yeah.
you were saying.
The last point is that I would like to make is that, and as you said, that it's like when you have this very enemy as your neighbor, then you will seek friends beyond your neighbor,
Yes.
which is US or the West, which is quite natural in your case. But unfortunately, from my observation, is US is not showing the friendship with a people under the threat of China, including like Vietnam, including Philippines, including Malaysia, including other like Thailand and other countries. So it's a bit like I feel you solitude to somewhere. Uh, you want to have friends, this genuine friends, to in that environment against, or not necessarily against China, but at least to be on your side. But then when you look around, this friend is not there,
Yeah,
or sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not, and that little bit frustrates you, a little bit like confuses you, and that deepens your sense of solitude. It's not like geographical solitude, it's not like a cultural solitude, but it's like a deeply existential solitude, or political existentialism, from a political existentialism point of view, that on the one hand you have some friends around this, like allies, declared or undeclared allies against China, including US sometimes. But at the same time, you know that you have to strengthen yourself. You are alone, and you have to fight this against China, even though you are alone. You have no other option. So
yeah,
it's like very sharpened sense of loneliness, sharpened sense of fighting against this gigantic evil force alone in that space. And that's also quite tragic. Not as tragic as our loss, our genocide, but again, in the long run, it's also tragic. I feel that.
yeah. Thank you very much for saying that. So I'd like to talk about the desire for independence and autonomy that the
Yeah,
Uyghurs and East Turkestan um, have and aspire to make a reality. I've already mentioned that you are a representative to the European Union of the East Turkestan government in exile.
in exile.
So please
Yes.
tell me about this governing body.
But like in order to answer your question, I will take a couple of steps back. That China's government tried to seduce us politically with the promises of autonomy. And we enjoyed this autonomy, or enjoyed this fake autonomy, for the past 60 or 70 years, until China was strengthened or emboldened to be able to carry out one of the heinous crimes in of the 20th 21st century. So, and we came to a conclusion that any kind of autonomy proposed, offered to us by the Chinese government, is another kind of trap, political trap, that only gives more time and more opportunities for China to eliminate us. So in that sense, we turn to independence as a perhaps last and desperate, as well quite tragic goal, that we have no other option. And so all options are used up and failed drastically. So the only option that we can achieve, hopefully, even hopelessly, is our independence. And nobody knows whether or not we get our independence or not. But independence is the most rational and most emotionally desperate as well for some people, but it's most rational option, one of the most rational options for us at this stage. And now the government, the East Texan government in exile, it has it was established in 2004 in the United States, and it has had 18 years of history, and this government has evolved from being small, being disunited, being ineffective, to be more united, more effective, and more like strategically vital in the overall political struggle of Uyghurs in exile. Um, so, of course, not all Uyghurs accept the political goal of this government, as well as not all foreign governments accept this goal as well. But despite this non-acceptance, internal or external, the government has moved forward to realize the political will of Uyghurs, however partial, or however not fully supported, but uh, at least this is one of the vital political goals of Uyghurs that the government represents, and it resolves to achieve one day in future.
Yes, here's hoping that that happens. Final
Thank you.
question, and also I would like to request to make a request in that can you provide me with some websites and articles and resources that those listening can use to find out more about the genocide that's happening right now. You can send it to me by email.
Uh,
I'll
yes, this is
post
a good
it.
question. It's also, yeah, East Turkestan Government in Exile, they have a website, and also World Uyghur Congress.
Mhm.
There's another Uyghur organization which also has a website. And it's interesting that you mentioned that there's no specific website created by Uyghurs dedicated to shed light on this genocide. And now, thank you so much that yes, this is important task for us to create one specific website for us to dedicated exclusively to this genocide issue. Thank you, but we don't have such a website at this stage.
Okay. I guess the website www.eastturkestan.net would
Yes,
suffice.
net, yes, and also World Uyghur Congress is a www dot world w World Uyghur Congress is WC dot just second just 1 second, sorry,
Yeah. I think you
www
can put
dot
it in the chat here, the Zoom chat.
VUC, yes, VUC org, I guess it's org, I guess, if I'm mistaken. No, it's not. Just 1 second. World Uyghur Congress. Yes, it's called www.uygurcongress.org.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'll provide that as well. So, final question. So how do you imagine that the genocide will end? And of course, we are excluding the worst case scenario in that, well, there's no one left to murder or to maim. So,
This is quite like a difficult question. It's in what just like it feels like me imagining how I die in bed or while walking or somewhere to imagine my own death type of question. Of course, first of all, I don't know how to die, when to die, where to die. But this genocide could be about this genocide could be something could be said. First of all, this genocide has lasted more than 6 years, which is extremely bad because this is like silent and slow motion genocide. And China is quite a clever, evilly, kind of like a evil genius to prolong this genocide, to normalize it, and to make the sharp response to it dull over time. And that's exactly what's happening. Previously, there was an outcry, there was lots of like campaigns worldwide against genocide. But now it's like more like people are like the West is focusing on some key issues like Uyghur forced labor, organ harvesting, though organ harvesting is not well researched, well advocated for, but it's still okay. But the genocide as a whole is not taken something seriously that world should act quickly. And hence, there is a whole lot of like normalization process. China is normalizing it. Like even the Chinese people think that this is like something normal thing, part of their daily life. They're not shocking. It's not tragic thing. It's just like just part of government policy. That's what's happening inside China. And the world has not been quite surprised to see the horrific aspects of this genocide, despite the fact that recent revelation of more than thousands of the photos being leaked. And so the world has just little bit like showed the shock and etc., but still everything is normalized, die down quickly. So, and Uyghurs themselves also going through this normalization process. So in that sense, this is like it feels like tragic music gradually dying down. That's how I see this. And because of the normalization, eventually the Uyghur genocide is forgotten. And China has predicted this, and so it's gradually, quite slowly, killing of Uyghurs, uh, testing the response of the world to it. And since there's no big response or strong or urgent response to it, China is not in a hurry to finish it. It takes time for it to kill all Uyghurs one by one until there's no Uyghurs. But by then, nobody says anything to this, and that is horrific to imagine. Even we are in that process now, in that direction to see things. And another thing is, and we have seen a reversal trend in welcoming China back in the world stage. For example, the Biden government is to some extent normalizing some aspects of its trade with China. Australia is doing the same. And Europe is a little bit strong, but how strong Europe will be against China is still unknown. So in that sense, this evil guy is again welcomed by the West into the international arena. So that's also how the Uyghur genocide, because there's always like a mirroring relationship. If the world forgets the Uyghur genocide, and also if the world accepts China again as a responsible like a country or state, then Uyghur genocide continues. And nobody cares about the Uyghur genocide in the end. And the number three is some international organizations are also accomplice in this genocide. Like, for example, recent visit of the Human Rights Commission's boss, the Bachelet, Miss Bachelet. So that was the actually she reconfirmed the Chinese policy on the genocide. Actually, it was worse, even counterproductive to this Uyghur genocide. And also UN hasn't said anything about the Uyghur genocide. And also the world organizations are quite mute over the Uyghur genocide. And China knows it. China is observing the whole temperature of the world around the Uyghur genocide thing. So ultimately, it's quite, for me, it's quite a scary thing to imagine further down the track that what's going to happen to Uyghur genocide. And it's 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 quite, if it goes in like this, Uyghur genocide will be forgotten quite soon, and no Uyghur will be left on earth, and that's horrible.
Yes, it's an incredibly bleak scenario
Yeah,
to even ponder and contemplate. The way I see it, the only way I think we can get out of this, or how the genocide can end in the least bad way, is that China's influence in the world stage starts to wane, and the international community starts,
yeah,
starts being more condemning of the country's practices and
yeah, yeah,
many human rights abuses, amongst them
yeah.
what's
And
happening.
also one more thing that I would like to add is that if and when China succeeds in silence the world over the Uyghur genocide, what else would you expect of such a evil regime? And who will be the next victim? Because same world, mute, pretentious, and weak world, and very strong China, then China will be relentless. China will never stop. Maybe Vietnam will be the next, or Taiwan will be the next, or somebody else will be the next. Because then it's like it's like a boiling like a frog syndrome,
Yes.
that we are all like in a water, that in a water underneath there's a fire, that we are just being in boiling water, that we are all die slowly, and it's quite bleak and quite like a apocalyptical view of the world. I can see that.
Yes. Well, trying to think of something, good to end on, but well, it's good enough that the wars being aware of what's going on, and it's good that there are voices like yours that are raising awareness of what's happening. So that being
Yeah.
said, Dr. Mamtimin Allah, thank you very much
Yes,
for
thank you.
a
And the
very
last question is that this program is in Vietnamese language, right?
is in English, but I'm based in
English.
Vietnam, so I just upload programs from Vietnam. But I
Okay,
think there
good.
are a couple of Vietnamese people who listen to the show. So
Okay, okay,
yeah,
okay, good. Thank you so much, and thank you for your time.
yeah, thank you for
And keep in touch in the future.
thank you,
And
and
good luck and success with your career and other things. And God bless Vietnam,
oh, thank you.
I would say.
God bless
Okay.
East Turkestan and its people. Please take care of
Thank you.
yourself.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.